Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hello and welcome or welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth on the KUNX Digital Broadcasting Network. We are live on Monday nights, and it's a pleasure to be live on this Monday night, especially after a week with COVID. Not fun, but zoomed through this one at a much higher speed than my first edition. No monologue tonight. I have a guest who reminds me, and before we go on there, I was trying to remember where the quote was from, but it's to the effect of, we are in great part the stories we tell ourselves. And I guess you could say in other part, the stories other people tell us. My guest tonight, Nomar Slevik, is an independent creator, writer, researcher, and investigator in numerous aspects of the paranormal. He delights in sharing stories through different mediums, such as his books, documentaries, and podcasts, and has been fascinated by all things paranormal since childhood, beginning with a UFO encounter at 4 years old. His life's passion has been to research, investigate, write, and share otherworldly encounters from everyday people in a manner that underscores the very human element in profoundly strange encounters. Nomar's latest book, UFOs Over Maine, has now just been republished in a special 10th anniversary edition, completely revamped and rewritten with over 150 encounters and stories added. And it is a pleasure to welcome my friend from Maine, Nomar Slevik. Welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Peter, thank you so much for having me back on.
Yes, in fact, yes, welcome back on, not welcome. How goes it in your part of Maine at this moment?
It goes well. Got some sun this summer, especially this weekend. I was at a paranormal fair at a fort that we have here in Maine. And I was with my girlfriend, and we sat in the sun and talked to a lot of fun, interesting people that shared some interesting stories, and got to get my books in their hands, which was fun. And it was a good time.
As you know, I like to begin at the beginning, and because of the level of your focus on these subjects from such an early age, can you tell us a bit about your parents and your early family life? Any brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I have a sister. She's older. She lives a couple of hours south from me in Maine. But for years, she lived on Long Island in New York, and that's where she met her husband and all that good stuff. She went to college down there.
Can I ask what college?
I was trying to think of the name of it, and I have since forgotten the name.
Where on Long Island? Do you remember where she lived?
I don't.
Okay.
I've even visited her, and I don't remember.
Does she share your interest in this subject?
She shares my interest in the strange, and also with, like, scary movies, things like that. But it's certainly not as in depth. But she's a reader, and she's a watcher of maybe what some people might call guilty pleasure shows. The Ghost Hunters and things like that. And, but yeah, it runs in the family. Really, the only one that's not super into any of that stuff is my dad. But he's a great supporter of what we're into. So, that works for us.
Can you tell me a bit about your parents themselves and what
Sure.
they do?
Sure. They're both retired now, but, certainly working class. My father was a high school teacher for over 40 years.
Oh.
And my mother started out her working life in the nursing field, and then that changed into nursing homes. And then her true passion, because she's a creative and I get all my creative stuff from her, she then transitioned into being a florist, and she ended up being a florist for 30 years and retired from
Ah,
that profession. But you go to her house now, and there's arrangements everywhere. The backyard looks like a beautiful tapestry, because she's always still designing, which is great.
lovely. Did you grow up in a rural part of Maine or in a village or a town or a city?
It was definitely my early life was very rural and remote even. We lived way at the tip of Maine in Fort Kent, just a stone's throw from Canada. We were so close to Canada that it was more convenient to get my hair cut in Canada as opposed to driving 10 minutes, in our town.
You can't get much more north in Maine than that.
Yeah, yeah. It was great. And customs back then was a trip too. Like, it was just super easy, super nice fellas. And they'd come out and, how you guys doing? Oh, good, good. And pop the trunk. They'd look in the trunk quick. All right, you're on your way. Almost never had a problem. They just wanted to make sure we weren't, buying cigarettes in Canada and selling them in Maine. That was basically what they were watching out.
Mm,
But yeah. So it was very rural growing up. And then we moved downstate in my grade school years, and we lived in the Bar Harbor area, which is very touristy during the summer. So
yes.
4 or 5 months with the leaf peepers added onto it, it's just super busy in the area. And a lot of us locals, unless you have a business, a lot of us locals kind of stay out of the way, if you will.
Yeah.
It can be very, very busy. But that's where I graduated high school. And but then I lived in Boston for a spell, and I lived in southern Maine, the Portland area, for over a decade.
Oh boy.
Yeah. So I've
Great
been around
city.
the state a little bit.
Um, you had your first UFO encounter, for lack of a better phrase, when you were just 4 years old, or your first one that you remember.
Yeah.
Can you tell us something about it and how the impact on you, whether you shared it with your folks?
Sure. Yeah. So like you said, I was quite young, 4 years old, and I had gone to bed just like normal. My mom would always put me to bed, and something woke me up in the middle of the night. And the way I remember it now is that it was some sort of bang. So my eyes kind of popped open, and I was looking around for an explanation, and none was immediately apparent. But then I started hearing these light taps on my window. And so I looked at the window, and I saw the sky light up, and I was like, oh, it's a thunder and lightning storm. It must be rain. And maybe what woke me up was thunder.
Sure.
So now I'm excited, and I want to sit up in bed and look out and watch the lightning, So I'm kneeled up in bed, I'm looking out the window, and I'm hearing booms. And the St. John River, which was, right on the outside of the house, it seemed like at the time, which separated Maine and Canada, was raging. I just remember it being really rough. And I was seeing, the lightning strikes. And even at that age, I knew that lightning strikes would happen in just less than a second. But after a moment or so, there was this really really disturbing lightning bolt. And the way I remember it now is, if I were to ask you to draw a lightning bolt, you would draw this jagged yellow line, and it was stuck in a cloud, like stuck in the sky in a cloud. And there was electricity coming off of it, like lightning strikes or something coming off of it, and there were more booms associated with it. And I didn't know what to make of it, but I don't really know what happened after that. I just remember waking up in the morning. So I get up in the morning, I go to the bathroom, and when I'm leaving the bathroom and walking back to my bedroom, I can see out my bedroom window, and I can still see the lightning bolt in the cloud. So I go downstairs to get my dad to show him, this weird lightning bolt.
Sure.
He comes upstairs, and I point outside, and I'm telling him, that, hey, there's this weird thing outside, and it's gone. And so I was like, what? So I'm trying to explain to him that, something woke me up and it was raining really hard. And then there was lightning. And then one of the lightning bolts got stuck in a cloud. And he was kind of doing the dad thing, like patting me on the top of the head and be like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But I must have been pretty insistent because he had to like kneel down, hands on my shoulders. He's like, buddy, it didn't even rain last night. Like, I don't know what you're talking about.
Sure.
And I'm like, oh, okay. And, being 4 years old, the next shiny thing caught my attention and I forgot about it. So a couple of weeks later, I'm being woken up again in the middle of the night. And when I say middle of the night, I'm 4 years old. Is that 9 p.m. or 3 a.m.? I have no idea. But this time it's my dad. And he brings me downstairs. And I can see my mother shoving my sister into her winter coat, and then she takes me and puts my winter coat and hat on. And then my dad scoops me up and we all walk outside. And I'm freezing cold because it's winter in Maine,
You've just woken up.
Yeah. And I'm like, what the hell's going on? Well, my 4-year-old mind is
Sure.
like, what's happening? And
Whatever's
I
going on.
Yeah. So I shoved my head in my dad's chest just to like stay warm. And I can hear him telling me, buddy, you got to look up. You got to look up. So I look up finally, and it's the Northern Lights, beautiful ribbons of like green and reds or whatever. And yeah. And the Aurora Borealis. So, and it's the only time I've seen them in my life. Like when they happened recently, it was too cloudy here to see them. Like both times.
I've only seen it twice in my life.
Oh yeah, yeah. So it was very memorable. So I think that created a core memory. Those two incidents happening so close together and at such a young age. I think it was a core memory that weird stuff happens in the sky. And I should pay attention. I didn't associate that lightning bolt with a UFO by any means at that time. It wasn't until I got to be like a tween or a teenager and I was actively seeking out strange stories when I remembered back to that lightning bolt. And I'm like, was the first time I saw a UFO? Because it doesn't make sense. My mind, my adult mind now still remembers it as the lightning bolt, but
yeah,
I don't know what to make of it.
There is this line between a frightening experience informed by being in the presence of the unknown. I guess you could say all fear is fear of the unknown if you take it down to the baseline. And then there's kind of fun fear, like, watching an original monster movie from the 1930s or something, or whatever the equivalent is for you.
Sure.
And as kids, we learn to distinguish. Many of us are drawn to great horror movies or films with lots of shock value or books or whatever, but we understand. And at the same time, we are also drawn to these unknowns that are real and that can be very anxiety provoking for ourselves or people that we're with. Do you remember at that point in your life when you had mastered reading and you were starting to be able to choose what you were reading on your own, whether the library or stuff around the house or whatever, what books, kinds of stories you were drawn from? Was it obviously this or other subjects and things?
It was surprisingly a lot of this stuff. And scary books. I remember my mother having Stephen King books around the house. There was It and Eyes of the Dragon. I remember, it was a green cover with the dragon on it, and it enthralled me just seeing the cover. And the It cover I thought was so weird. It was this weird reptilian claw coming out of the sewer, and little did I know that was based on an area that was just like less than an hour from my house. I didn't have a concept that he was a local author and it was based on towns, that he grew up in Maine. But anyway, I remember seeing scary covers like that. And I was very much into watching scary programming on TV, the unsolved mysteries, things like that. And when it came to reading, I had a hard time in school getting into the books that they wanted us to read. I
Yeah.
remember liking Of Mice and Men, and I remember liking Lord of the Flies, but other than that, there wasn't a whole lot that I liked. So I really liked it when we had book fairs at school, and they would set up a classroom with all these little shelves, and I would go
Wonderful.
to yeah, and I would go to I don't even know what section they called it back then. I don't know if it was unknown or ghosts or something. It certainly wasn't paranormal, but they would have books on ghosts, and the Bermuda Triangle was like huge back then. There seemed to be like 100 books on that topic, and Bigfoot books, and the Loch Ness Monster, and of course UFOs. So whatever they had for strange books, and of course I had a budget, so I might have been able to afford like 2 books, maybe 3 if I was lucky, and I would just. It was painstaking. Sometimes I would have to be asked to like, you got to choose something and then go. Okay, you're taking too long here. Your class is almost done.
Um,
So go ahead,
um,
please.
you anticipate one of my questions, which was, as such a beloved and well-known and popular and successful author
Mm,
associated with the state of Maine, how you had first kind of come upon Stephen King as a writer.
yeah,
He's somebody I have tremendous admiration for as a
same.
writer and as a human being.
Yeah,
And talk about putting your success into practice in the best possible way,
yeah,
in your backyard, big backyard that
yeah.
it is.
It is. Yeah.
Um, there came a point, maybe it was in elementary school, middle school, junior high school, whatever, where part of you had to be saying, the world is telling me I have to be some kind of thing when I am what they call a grown up, and there's a profession or a job. Did you entertain a job or a career other than where you are right now? And if so, what was that?
Mhm. I definitely didn't entertain that I would be doing what I'm doing right now. Uh, a young boy living in Maine, it's hard to see, past the woods or the railroad or
Yeah,
or whatever rural moment that people like me where we lived. It was
yeah,
hard to look beyond that. And Stephen King and stuff like that was just entertainment, but I was so enthralled by his work, by these other books I was telling you that I buy at the book fairs, because they weren't selling Stephen King books at the book fair, but my mother had them around the house and the library had them. So I would take them out, and I did my best to kind of like really kind of flip pages and read passages, but I was too young to follow his narrative, at that age. But the covers certainly enthralled me. But yeah, I didn't have aspirations that that's something I could do. That's just a thing that other people did. And I was, I think my first real introduction to the stories of Stephen King came from the movies, and
uh,
Silver Bullet was a big one for me. That's his werewolf story. It was the book version was called Cycle of the Werewolf, and it's actually kind of interesting, the origins of it. It was supposed to be a calendar at first, and Stephen King was to write little passages for, little paragraphs for each month, and then there was an illustrator that would draw an illustration to go with their writing for each month. And so Stephen King, was commissioned to do this, and he started doing it. But Stephen King, being Stephen King, he couldn't stop himself from writing. So the next thing you know, a short story or novella is born from it, and the publisher was like, "Well, yeah, we're into putting that out." So, anyways, they turned that into the movie Silver Bullet, and it's about werewolves, and it obviously, takes place in Maine. And I was maybe, because it came out in '85, and in '85 I was like 8 years old, something like that, and uh, I probably saw it right when it got to VHS. I don't think I went and saw it in the movie theater, so I probably saw it a year or two after that in like '86 or '87, and I was completely and utterly hooked on horror movies and Stephen King at that moment, and it
yeah,
inspired me to that's when I at least wanted to be creative. And that's when I started writing my own stories. And for years, and to this day, and I even have a book of them now, a published work of them, but I always wrote short horror story fiction. And I would, I'd be in class and I'd be right. I think the first story I ever wrote, I don't remember the title, but it was like an amalgamation of Michael Myers and Jason Voorhees, from Friday the 13th and Halloween. And it was some sort of serial killer, with a mix of those two. And I remember my teacher being a bit concerned, and she actually called my parents about it.
Oh,
Yeah. Because it's Northern Maine. We're very much removed from society, it feels like, even to this day. And that was a concern for her, that I was writing something so disturbing. And my mom was like, that's just horror movie stuff, like it's fine, and it was fine.
well, good for your teacher for, just being on the case, because
To make sure,
Yeah.
yeah, especially back then, I don't know how much sensitivity was brought to some situations like that, so it is good to know that she had my back if something was up.
it's so interesting to be a product of, or experienced in, or uh, part of these two very different kinds of writing,
Mhm.
fictional, horror, scary kinds of narratives, and the real thing,
Yeah,
these true tales of the strange.
yeah.
Um, Let me ask you, do you remember the first time, it could have been as a kid, adolescent, young adult, when somebody confided to you a true story from their life that fell into this category, whether it was experiencer related, or just generic scary related, or following a classic theme, or involving seemingly spirits? Or do you remember that first exchange with somebody?
I do, and it actually follows my first true life scary moment, because the
You
lightning bolt wasn't scary.
Yeah.
I was just like, "What the hell's that?" You know what I mean? And then I saw the Northern Lights, same thing. I didn't think it was scary. I was just like, "What the hell's that?" And it's in the sky. But the first thing that scared me,
Yes.
I was probably like 8 years old, and I was at an aunt's house, and her husband had passed away some years before. I never met them, and my mother and her were downstairs talking. My dad was outside, like mowing the lawn or something, and I had to use the bathroom, and I hated going upstairs there. I didn't remember why until this moment.
Ah,
But even being down at the bottom of the staircase and looking up, the upstairs seemed to be in this blue haze. And I always thought it was so weird that nobody ever mentioned it, because it was very different. Downstairs was bright and colorful, but upstairs was like this, I don't know, like the winter, like the lighting of winter. So weird. And that's where the bathroom was. And so I often remember like running upstairs, going to the bathroom really quick. I would fake washing my hands, and like run downstairs. But this one particular time, I'm going up the stairs, and I'm very freaked out. So I'm slowly making my way up. I'm not running this time. And a picture of her husband, again, who has passed away, is at the top of the stairs on this stand that's like in this hallway.
oh
And
boy.
to me, it was a haunting picture. I remember it as him being quite gaunt. I feel like it was taken a lot later in his life, and he was wearing a suit. And it scared me. And I feel like, or I felt at that time anyways, that his presence was the one that was up there and caused me to be scared. And so when you got to the top of the stairs, it kind of came to a T. You couldn't go straight anymore. You could only go left or right. And I
Mhm.
remember to the right, I couldn't even look to the right. It felt like that's where he was. And if I
Mm.
looked, I would see him, and I didn't want to see him. So I would go left as quick as I could, get to the bathroom, close the door. And sometimes I get yelled at for like slamming it, and I wouldn't mean to, but I was just trying to get in there so fast.
Yeah.
So I'd go to the bathroom, and I remember this particular time I'm in the bathroom, and I swear I can hear movement out in the hallway.
Oh,
Again, this is all happening within a few seconds. It's not like I'm in there for 10 minutes or anything, but so I actually wash my hands, And because my mom got into a thing where she started smelling them, to make sure I washed them. So I washed my hands this time, and I opened, like I creep the door open, very slowly. And I'm looking around. There's nobody out there. So I'm like, okay, cool. I go to the top of the stairs, and I inadvertently look to where I shouldn't look. Thankfully, I didn't see anything, but the presence that I felt like something was right behind me, and it loomed large behind me. Like I just felt he was, and I, any second he was going to push me down the stairs or say boo in my ear or something. So I ran back downstairs, right after that. I didn't take my time. It really scared me. So that all happens. I come downstairs, and I think I'm visibly upset. And I remember my aunt asked me, like, you okay, honey? Something like that. And, oh, yeah, where's dad? You know what I mean? And then I ran outside
Sure.
to get away from it all. And it was probably, I don't know, you know how young minds are. I don't know if it was a day or two later or a week or two later, but I confided in my mom about it. And she's like, I used to live with aunt so-and-so. And so I wasn't immediately chastised, because sometimes that happened a lot, but I wasn't this time. And she's like, I used to live with her for a time
in that house.
And she had a bedroom upstairs, and it was on the bathroom side, not on the scary side, but she would be in her bed, and she would hear things, and she would call out to my aunt, and she'd be like, that's just the cat. Don't worry about it. But my mother felt like it was almost, I know what it is, but I'm not going to tell her what it is so I don't scare her. You know what I mean? That's how my mom felt about it. So this one night, the hall light kept turning on. They're both upstairs trying to go to bed, and the hall light kept turning on. And my mother finally calls out and was like, why do you keep turning on the hall light? And she's like, it's not me. And so my aunt couldn't cover that one up, And so this is my mom telling me this, and I'm like, like, wow, I can't believe, I'm hearing this, and it's somebody I know.
Validated by somebody I know and trust.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that was really the crux of the story. The whole light kind of kept going on and off, but my aunt did find out the next day that around the time the hall light started going off and on, a young boy, meaning high school aged, was out driving, and it was a rainstorm apparently, and he had gotten into an accident and passed away. And that was big news in such a small town, what I mean? And apparently that light, according to my aunt, was turning off and on when his time of death was announced or whatever. Yeah, so my mother, I felt like, because it was just her and I talking, and I remember kind of being crouched down, and we were like talking softly to each other. I shared mine and she shared hers, and I was just like, wow. I was like, I need more scary stories. I'm scared, but I'm also titillated, And so I asked her if she experienced anything else. That was the first time I openly asked somebody if they had a strange story. And she proceeded to tell me some more stories from a different house that she was in where some ghostly activity was happening. And so that was really interesting. And it was also around the same time frame where she was introducing me to horror movies. She's a lifelong lover of horror movies. She saw Exorcist in the theater. Yeah. She saw Exorcist in the theater, and she knew that it's a fun thing. It's not a disturbing thing. People can make it disturbing if they want to, they can be of that opinion, but she knew it was a fun thing, and she knew I'd love it, especially with my interest, And so I think the first horror movie I saw was Phantasm, which is kind of obscure, not for horror fans, but for laymen who aren't into horror, it's kind of obscure. And I really didn't get the whole narrative of it at the time, but I was just fascinated by the imagery. It didn't scare me. I was like, I need more of this. And that's also, again, around the same time, I'm seeing these really wild Stephen King covers, where I want to consume what's in there. And I'm like, there's movies based on his work. Of course, my mom's introducing me to that. So the first Stephen King thing I saw was Silver Bullet, and And then it just kind of kept going on from there. Hopefully that answered your question. I went
Yes.
on a little tangent there, but
I know that's great. I'm curious, at what point you said to yourself, I need more stories. Where do I go for them? How do I begin to approach people? And I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But to do what you do, what I do to a degree, what colleagues do of collecting or putting forward or giving people an opportunity to share their accounts of the non-standard in life, we have to maintain an open mind, not so open that our brain falls out the other side, but open. And we go through our own doors of shock, anxiety, um, going from rejecting an idea to experiencing it, or at least
Mm,
giving it a fairer shot. And the idea of ghosts, of spirits, of the undead, of the non living, of these presences that either move on or stay where they are, associated with sometimes pieces of architecture or areas. Or um, do you remember how your ideas came together on this phenomena? The things that you kind of told yourself or studied to get to the point where you are now. And I'm assuming that you take this idea seriously, that
mm.
when you die, you don't necessarily get eaten by worms and everything goes black forever, that you may linger or you may interact, or again, you may move on. Um, in order to chronicle these things, unless, one were an arch debunker and collecting such accounts to somehow show them up or belittle people, this is hardly that. A little bit about your genesis on that, and maybe an account that convinced you or gave you more grounds to take this idea seriously.
Sure. So um, there's one specific thing that convinced me, but the genesis is something entirely different
Hmm.
after, and I'll get to that after. But the thing that convinced me, I don't think I've ever spoken publicly about this. I do a lot of interviews. I talk to a lot of people, and I don't even think my girlfriend's listening, I think, or watching. Hi, Christina, I love you. Uh, I don't even think I told her this story, but
Good. Sure.
this was before um, the thing that happened at my aunt's house, and
Okay.
it was like an ongoing thing. It might have been a same time frame, but it feels like it happened early.
7 or 8 years old.
Something like that, maybe even 5 or 6. Uh, so every night I would go to bed, and I say every night, but it felt like it was often. I would sense or see somebody standing in the doorway of my bedroom, and had a very small bedroom. And it was a towering figure to me, being 5, 6, 7 years old, and could smell alcohol. And it would get closer and get closer to the point where now it's standing right next to me, right beside my bed.
Hmm.
And then it would lean over me, like the mic is me, and this thing is leaning right over me. And I could feel its hot breath. And I pictured an angry man, an older angry man with alcohol in his breath. And this may be disturbing, but it felt like there was something sexual in nature there too. And it definitely wasn't my dad, because I would get up and running scared from this sometimes to go sleep in between my folks, and my dad was in bed. You know what I mean? Like it certainly wasn't him coming into
Yeah.
my room. So, but again, I sometimes I would just sense this or feel it. I didn't always see it, but it happened often. And to put a time frame around it, it feels like it happened for like a year, and then it just stopped. So I don't understand that, paranormally speaking, from a researcher's perspective. I kind of don't get how a haunting like that just starts and stops, like within a year. And it felt very focused on me. But I also feel like it might have been an impression that was a part of that room before we got there. And it lingered there for whatever reason.
Hmm.
And it might have been a residual type of haunting, which people say, paranormal investigators say a residual haunting is something that can't interact with you. You can't interact with it. It's just like a record tape playing or whatever. And that's what it felt like. It didn't seem like it was mad at me. It didn't seem, but it was just there. And that really scared me. But I don't know. It was weird. I would also forget about it sometimes, and then it would happen again, and I'd be like, "Oh yeah," and I would get scared again. So, anyways, that was weird stuff happens. I don't know what that is, but that seemed like a ghost, and that's what convinced me that ghosts are real. Now, the genesis of what a ghost is has been a roller coaster my entire life. I grew up in a Catholic family. I am non-denominational now, but I grew up in a Catholic family. My mother is still very Catholic. My dad doesn't really care, which is great for him. You know what I mean? And it's fine for me. And my mom doesn't try to push that on us, which is cool. But growing up in a Catholic family, ghosts were ghosts, and there were also demons, and the devil was real. And that's why The Exorcist really disturbed my mother very much, and because she that happened. And so I was of the belief for quite some time that ghosts were dead people that had passed away, the no longer living. And that has changed. I was young when I had that thought. And then I started to, and nothing really was a catalyst for me to think any different from that concept for quite some time. It wasn't until I was in like my late 20s when I started my own paranormal group, and we were seeking out ghosts, if you will. And we were like putting a microscope on them, figuratively, of course, but
Sure.
But kind of examining more like what's actually happening. Is it a haunting in the traditional sense? Because some team members, that's what they believed, it was dead people. And then other people believed that, some sort of quantum theory or multiverse theory where our universes, our worlds can like intermingle sometimes. And they're just bleeding over, and that's what ghosts are. It's people that are living just at a different time, but our times got mixed for a second for whatever reason, because the perfect storm of things happened, and we could see through the veil, and they might see us as ghosts where we see them as ghosts too. I don't know how it works. And now I feel like cryptids of all kinds, ghosts, aliens, I feel like that might be all one thing. Interdimensional beings. It might be all one thing. And we're so caught up in our different lenses. The ghost investigators, the paranormal investigators are like, that's a ghost, that's a dead person. The cryptids are like, that's a Bigfoot, that's a nightcrawler, that's a Mothman. And people like me and you are like, that's an alien, that's an extraterrestrial, that's not from our world. But I'm not so sure anymore, because some of the symptoms of these things are very similar.
Brother Peter.
Yeah.
We have lost audio on him.
Yeah. I
check. Am I back?
There we go. We got you back, brother.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Continue on.
So I'm wondering. I gesture so freaking much that I accidentally bumped the thing. Anyway, is it all the same thing? but from a different perspective, or however we're experiencing it. You know what I mean? Like, it feels more connected, like the symptoms of these hauntings, and lights in the sky. Like, lights in the sky seem ghostly, and seeing a ghost peeking around a corner can seem like maybe a gray alien peeking at us, and something monstrous in the woods, might seem maybe more like a haunting in the woods as opposed to an actual cryptid creature. I don't know if any of that is true, but as I'm getting older and keep collecting accounts from people, I'm like, is all of this connected? Are there no ghosts? Are there no cryptids? Are there no aliens? It's all part of the same thing. And I find that really intriguing, because I think if I can try to be as unbiased as possible, I feel like that opens me up to different types of questions to ask people when I'm interviewing them. It opens me up to not being my mind being so open that my brain falls out, like you were saying earlier, but I'm so open that I can accept the strangest thing someone's telling me. And I don't have to come at them in ridicule or non-belief, or that sounds like a haunting, go talk to this guy. I can just hear the story and be kind and non-judgmental, and hopefully learn from it. So, but you ask me a week from now, I'm like, no, those are aliens, and those are ghosts, those are dead people. So it evolves, and I think that's as you get more information, I think that's healthy. So
I, after all the years that I've been involved in this work, one thing that I am most sure of is how unsure I am of hyper-specific details that certain colleagues, of course, put forward as statistically or physically accurate as the can you're drinking from or the microphones you're speaking into.
right.
Part of the challenge of this work is one can make the most complex, strange, outrageous claims and rest your case by saying, prove me wrong.
Right.
It's like, where is that carburetor from a flying saucer, or that
Right.
thumb from a gray alien that we can put forward to the world and say, here it is.
Mhm.
When you began work originally on the book that has now come full circle and
Mm.
been republished, did you begin with the idea of, I'm going to write a book about all the stuff I've been thinking about, or it just kind of grew up and you realized it was happening and then went with it?
That's a really good question. I don't think I've been asked it quite that way. So there was a specific moment, like when it happened, but it was organic to the point on how I got to that point. So I'd been collecting stories since I was a teenager, and I've been collecting stories since I was a teenager, and some were handwritten, some even on napkins, just what I had.
Sure.
But a lot of notebooks. But there would also be like cutouts from newspapers where there have been a UFO story that got published or something. And so I'd had all these little cutouts, and then there were handwritten stories from me asking friends if they had any experiences in writing down stuff that they told me. And of course, my mother's stories that she told me, I documented, in my scratchy handwriting. And I was probably, I think I was 24, but I was sitting at my desk, and after high school, I turned into this voracious reader. And so I have all these collection of books, and, and more often than I care to admit, I would often like reorganize the shelves. Like, okay, it's all genred now. And then it would just be alphabetical and the genre didn't matter, And in this particular instance, they were genred. And so I had like my fiction books, the Stephen Kings and whatever's. And I had my ghost books, and there was a couple UFO books, but I had my little paranormal section.
Sure.
But my favorite thing ever since I was super duper young, and I think it's because of the subconscious thought of that lightning bolt, and then hearing an early account of the Allagash abductions from
Oh,
Unsolved
yes.
Mysteries when I was like, 8 or 9 years old. And that scared the hell out of me. I'm looking at the shelf. I'm like, there are some books here that have UFO stories in them from Maine, but there isn't a book dedicated to that.
Ah,
And I was like, I've got a lot of stories. I wonder if I could be the one to write that book.
Yeah.
And that was the catalyst to like pull out my folder of collected stories and like, can I shape this into something? And a lot of times I just had the meat of the story. So and so it was this time of night and they looked up or, whatever. So it wasn't a story. And if anybody has the first book, you'll see how short it is, first of all. And part of that was the publisher, part of that was me, but you'll see how short the actual stories within them are because I wasn't the best researcher at the time. And sometimes I only had the meat of the story, not all the cool stuff that surrounds it. Like what's the town like where they're from and, things like that. Or what was the weather like that night? And, to round out a story. So it took me like 6 years to get a manuscript done. I was in my 30s by the time it was done, but it was something I worked on and off for a while.
Sure.
And my dad being a teacher, a high school teacher for all these years, I let him edit my manuscript.
That's great.
Yeah. He had a great time with it too. He actually still does it to this day, but these
That's
days
great.
I'll have like 3 or 4 editors, proofreaders and things,
Sure.
just because, even the best can miss something here.
Oh,
and there.
yes. Very important.
I think the book that just came out has 16 drafts, maybe 18 drafts and 3 editors, and there's still some typos in it, so you do the best you can.
It's the damnedest thing. I know.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
there's some little mystery maker that comes back at night and throws a few extra ones
It's
in and
the little gremlin, you know what I mean?
let's give him a semicolon instead of a colon here. He'll never notice until it's in print.
Yeah, instead of splayed, it's played because you forgot the S, but it didn't catch it because it's not a misspelling, played is spelled right. But anyway, I literally just caught that tonight, but
Let's we have about almost 10 minutes left in our first hour.
Sure.
Let's go to UFOs Over Maine and ask you to take a moment and locate one of the stories that might take about 8 minutes or so to share, or a little more, a little less, and give us an idea of some of what you've collected in this now updated and revised book.
Sure. So what I wanted for this new version, first of all, was to have it written a lot better. I don't know if you've looked at any of your work that's 10 years old.
Oh, gosh.
But it's cringe, you know what I mean? I'm like, I'm not proud of that anymore. So I didn't want to just republish it because the rights have reverted back to me now, and I didn't just want to put it out again. And I read through it and I'm like, oh God, this is awful. So all the original stories are in the book, but I completely reconstructed them. And then I added 150 more stories on top of it. So that whole process was, tough, but amazing as well. Because I feel like I finally wrote the book that I wanted to write on UFOs in Maine, And a goal was to write as many never before published stories as possible. And one of them is one of the strangest sightings I've ever heard of. It doesn't involve a creature. It's not super scary, but it's friggin' weird. And I've never heard of anything like it. There's this gentleman. He's from northern Maine, so very rural, very remote. And in his adult life, he moved to Portland, Maine, which is in southern Maine. It's very populated. It's certainly a city. It's like a mini Boston now. And he would come up to visit his folks. And he did this in 2015. And he loved to sit on the lawn at night and look up at the stars, 0 light pollution. And he admitted that he liked to roll and smoke a joint while he did this. So he's out there. He finished rolling a joint. He hasn't lit it yet. And he's like pulling his lighter out and he's looking at the joint. And there's a flash of light above him. And it's, it's just a quick flash. And he's like, what the hell's that? And he looks up. Nothing. All right, that was weird. Maybe heat lightning. I don't know. So now the lighter's not lighting. He's like, crap. He's like, well, let me get a patio chair so I can get comfortable out here. So he goes and gets a patio chair. While he's walking to get the chair, there's another flash of light above him. And then there's a sound associated with it. It's like a hissing sound. And he's like, what the hell? And he looks up again. And so he's like, okay, forget this joint, forget this patio chair. And now he's just standing in the middle of the lawn looking up. He's like, I'm not going to miss it this time. And sure enough, he misses it because it happens behind him. It's another really bright flash. And it's almost like fluttering, like it's longer lasting this time. And then there's a longer hissing sound. And so he immediately turns around and he's just seeing the afterglow of it. And it wasn't just like this glowy blob of light, that could be like misty or cloud-like or something. He kind of saw a rectangle. And so he's watching that area, and sure enough, it lights up again. And he described it as miles wide rectangle that almost looked like a TV. And there were these lines going to the center inside this rectangle. And it almost looked like a snowy television. And those lines, that's where that sound, that hissing sound, and sometimes it would crackle, but it was mostly a hissing sound. That's where it emanated from, in his opinion. And they were all coalescing to the center, but they were coming and all going into the center of this, again, miles wide thing. And he was measuring constellations and seeing how big this thing was. That's why he figured it was miles wide. But it also didn't seem celestial. It seemed like it was down in our atmosphere. In fact, he thought it was hovering over a field that wasn't too far from his house. So now he's watching this thing. And the rectangle is getting smaller. It's shrinking. And as it's shrinking, the lights and the lines and the hissing are getting more and more intense. And it's shrinking and it's shrinking. And now the edge of the square or rectangle are fading. And that light in the center where the lines are coalescing is so intense that he can really only see a circle now. And the circle is so bright and the hissing, it's almost deafening. And it gets so small. And then it shoots off at an arc and is out of sight in seconds. The whole thing lasted maybe a minute, if that. And then he's just standing there in the dark, alone, looking up at the sky, trying to understand what the hell just happened. Having no other course of action, he went back inside. He woke up in the morning. He still couldn't stop thinking about it. I mean, neither would I, So he's like, I'm going to walk in the direction of where I think this thing was hovering. And so he left the house. He's walking down the driveway and he's walking down the road and he sees the field that he feels like it was hovering over. And so he starts walking into the field. And he gets about a mile into this field. In northern Maine, we're talking huge wheat fields. It goes on and on and on. So he's about a mile into this trek.
Wow.
And he claims to see the weirdest crop circle. It was in the shape of a check mark. But it was burned. It wasn't like the grass was splayed, but there was also burn marks. And again, it was in the shape of this check mark. Happening in 2015. He didn't have the best phone, but he did have a smartphone, and he tried to get the best angle he could from, standing on the surface with it. It's tough because it was pretty big, he thought, and so it was tough for him to get the whole thing in the shot, but he did. And it was, a year later, that phone that had the pictures on it got stolen from while he was at work from, some customer came in and stole it. And he regretted that he never uploaded those pictures.
Oh, of course.
But talking to this person, there was no agenda. It's something that he held close to the chest. And he finally felt like it was time to come forward with the story, And so I talked to him in 2018 and then again in 2022 and 2023. And fascinating story.
You bring up a very important point here, Nomar. And there may be people watching or listening to our conversation who are saying to themselves, boy, these seem like nice guys, but they are too trusting. Anybody can tell you anything. Yeah. And when you do this enough, I know I'm a living example that you could really get it wrong and make a character judgment that's inaccurate, that blows back on you at some point or another. However, overwhelmingly, the people that want to go on the record with their experiences, you don't have to be a mental health professional to assess that the great majority of them are sincere. They're not looking to cash in on this. They're not looking for fame or fortune. They just want to go on the record and maybe get some feedback or a little understanding or a little more understanding of something that happened to them, or they observe that they can't understand or having trouble wrapping their head around, that there overwhelmingly is this truthful reality that people approach you with, unless, again, there's just that, I don't know, a garden variety pathology of somebody who gets a kick out of making somebody else look silly or believe something that's
Right.
not true. These are the exceptions to the rule, don't you
Right.
find?
I do. I definitely do.
And with that, I'm going to have to cut you off because we are going into our break. Peter Robbins here. Meanwhile, Here on Earth is the show. Nomar Slevik is my guest, and it's a pleasure to have him on. And we'll see you back here in about 4 minutes. Don't
This
go away.
September 6th through the 13th, join with like-minded souls in the experience of a lifetime on the Royal Caribbean Ovation of the Seas as we travel from Seattle to Alaska. Internationally renowned researchers, investigators, experiencers, authors, holistic healers, contactees, spiritual luminaries will sail on an extraordinary voyage of transformation. This cruise will explore UFOs, alien contact, cover-ups, ancient mysteries, the paranormal, holistic healing, and spirituality. Experience engaging lectures, one-on-one sessions, private, custom-tailored excursions, and a nightly UFO watch. The cruise is booking up fast. Go to contactatsea.com and be sure to mention the UNX Network when you book. That's contactatsea.com or phone 336-749-1219. That's 336-749-1219.
This is Margie Kay, and I'd like to say thank you to all of our KUNX show hosts, staff, listeners, and viewers for making us number one on Paranormal Talk Radio.
While most near-death experiencers return to this plane of existence with alluring tales of their time spent in the presence of the divine, what happens when one crosses the veil into the afterlife, into the void? In the new book, Dying to Meet Them, Mindy Toutfest describes her journey to the afterlife after a devastating aneurysm, how a strange turn of events would lead her to spiritual growth, divine healing, UFO experiences, and a greater understanding of the universe. Get your copy of Dying to Meet Them today at Amazon.com or visit unxmedia.com for more information on this book and more amazing selections from UNX Media Publishing at unxmedia.com.
And we are back with Meanwhile, Here on Earth, with my special guest, Nomar Slevik. And here he is again. Welcome. I hope you had a very nice 4-minute break there. Read a book.
I did.
Watched the movie. Sometimes the most memorable stories or accounts that one receives are the ones that you're not looking for, that come at you from left field, that somebody shares with you, and every once in a while you find yourself almost going into another place because you realize at a certain point, this is something you need to really listen to. And you kind of shift gears inside yourself, reset your priorities, have to remember this, write it down. Can you give us an example of an account that somebody has shared with you that completely affected you, that you were completely unprepared for? Is there a particular account that fits into that profile? I ask because I've had a handful of them in my life, and I'm thinking of several of them right now, that they form kind of little personal BC and ADs, just
Yeah,
little
yeah, yeah.
lines that you measure back and forward from
Yeah.
in terms of other people's experiences. But I guess the combination of the way it's related, particulars, details, what the individual is looking like when they're telling the story, they're special. And does one of those, something in that category, come to your mind now?
It does, and it might be my first AD. I a woman contacted me and said that she had been having these encounters, just like any other person, So I'm like, okay, what's going
She
on?
knew you through your books or being on the radio, or just that?
From the first book, she had it,
Okay.
and it's quite obvious that I'm a local author because she was, from Maine, and she had contacted me and said that she had these encounters and that even her friend had been written up before in a newspaper. And if I wanted to read some of it, because some of little tidbits of her story was in there too. So I found the newspaper because she gave me, the date and what the paper was and everything. And I found the article, and it's a tremendous article. Again, it's not all her story; it's mostly her friend's story, but it was pretty incredible. And they lived about 2 hours northwest of me. I'm already, in the middle of the state. I'm coastal, but I'm already middle of the state, and I would be going like 2 hours, north and west into the state, and which isn't really my stomping grounds. I'm either like northern Maine, coastal Maine, or like southern Maine. I
Sure.
don't get to western Maine much. It's very rural. And first of all, I thought it would be fun to drive out there to interview her. And you don't make an interviewee come to you; you go to them. So we set up a date and time when I could talk to her. And her friend that was featured in that newspaper also owned an inn and restaurant, and we could meet at her restaurant. So I show up, and she's already sitting at the table. She introduces me to her friend. We sit down and we get some coffee, and she orders some toast, and she's kind of getting comfortable with me, and having a little bit of small talk. She
Sure.
actually asked for a couple of stories that other people have told me, and so I just told her some stuff that has been published already, and so then she's like, well, I want to tell you this first story. Happened in the mid 90s. She was married at the time, and her kids were teenagers, like 14 and 16, a girl and a boy. And it was about a little before 9 p.m. It was just a random, like weeknight. And mom and dad were going to go upstairs, lay in bed, and watch a movie. And the kids were going to stay downstairs and watch a different movie on TV. So she's upstairs, she's brushing her teeth, and her husband's like in the bedroom already. I don't know if he's turning on the TV or what he's doing, but she's brushing her teeth. And he goes, well, that's a weird light. What is that? And she kind of pokes her head out of the bathroom, toothbrush in her mouth, like, huh? He's like, there's this weird light outside. You should come see it. And she's like, that's just the moon. It's a full moon tonight, because it was really bright outside. And he's like, no, the moon's over here. This is over here. And he's like, come see it. So she gets done brushing. She goes and looks. And sure enough, there's this big ball of light high in the sky. It's moon sized and moon high in the sky. And then she looks over there. Well, yep, there's the moon. And then there's a second moon. That's weird. He's like, you want to go outside and look at it? And she's like, yeah. So they start coming downstairs, and they're trekking through the living room, and the kids are right there. And they're like, what are you guys doing? Because they see mom and dad headed to the front door. And like, oh, there's this weird light outside. You want to come check it out? And the kids were like, sure. So now all 4 of them are outside. And where this light was on the extreme right of the house, and their porch faced this way, but the light was like over here, apparently. So they're all kind of leaning over, watching this light in the sky. And after just a moment or so, the light zooms to right in front of them. And it's lower, much lower in altitude. Again, not celestial at this point. It seems like it's just above the treetops. And they are all just staring at it like, what the hell just happened? How did it get from here to there? Why is it, they don't know what to think. So they're watching it. And just a moment later, it blinks out. And they're all kind of like, blink, blink, blink. That was weird. Well, let's go back inside. So they go back inside. And the kids go, hey, our movie's over. And mom's like, what are you talking about? Because there's credits rolling on the screen. And she's like, no, that's the movie that was just on. Your movie's about to come on. And they're like, no. I saw they were seeing the actors in it as it scrolled by. And like, no, that's what the movie we're going to watch. So she's like, hold on. So she goes into the kitchen and looks at the time on the
90 minutes.
It was 2 hours. So it was now just, I think just before 11. And she exclaimed that to the rest of the house. And everybody just looked at each other, and they all understood that something strange happened. But it kind of went unspoken.
Often the case.
Yeah. So that wasn't the first thing that happened to her, but that was the first story she felt comfortable telling me. And of course, that's strange. There's some missing time, an entire family, like it's a pretty cool story.
Yeah.
But then she starts getting into more personal stuff, some things that happened in her childhood. She almost died in a car accident, and her vehicle fell or went off a bridge, and it fell into like this man-made like ravine, and where it's got concrete as borders on either side.
Whoa.
And the car went just perfectly in it. If it was one way or another, like it would have crinkled, it would have done something more. It fell in just such a way that she was able to survive it, and nobody could believe it. And she walked away from it. And then when she got home, there was this weird television show that was on. She'd never seen the show on before. Nobody was, her parents had gotten home. I forget where her parents were, but there was a whole hospital thing where she had to go to the hospital. And so now she's home. So maybe she had been sitting there for a while and was changing the channel and came across this story. I forget it now, but the whole story's in the book. I forget the minute details, but she comes across this program, and she's alone on the couch. And they're talking about this book that this author put out. And it's how some of your memories might not be yours. There's something called step-ins, where something might step into you or to your brain, and now you're remembering their memories. And for some reason, that really resonated with her. And she didn't know why she was being exposed to that at that time. She'd never seen that show before. So it gets a little bit more intense, which, I'm not going to get into. There's some stuff she shared that that's not in the book. And then she went on to tell me some other stories that happened later on in life. And there were implants that were seen on X-ray by doctors. And she had never, they thought she had been shot by, BB guns or something. And because there was these little balls in there, but there was no scar, which was really strange, because sometimes there's scar marks, but there was no scar on her hip where this thing was. And that was really disturbing to her. And so it took her quite a while to put all these pieces together. And reading my book, and I'm sure watching and reading some.
Your audio's just gone out.
Check.
There we go. Very good. Continue
sorry,
on.
Peter.
That's okay. It's not your fault.
I'm just anyway. So, she has another bout of really strange missing time, and that's another whole story. But then she started having these really strange dreams, and she's on this spaceship, and there's this Pink Floyd song that's playing, and everything. And she's with her husband, and everything on the spaceship is white. And they walk into this room, and they can see outside. She's just seeing stars, like as they're flying. And they go into this elevator and go to like the second floor in this spaceship, and it opens up, and it's almost like a Walmart, she said, where there's just racks and racks of clothes, and they're all white, but all the female stuff is in her size and all the male stuff is in her husband's size. And then she wakes up from it, but she would have that dream for like a decade, and every time her husband would open his mouth, it would be the Pink Floyd song, when he tried talking to her. Really strange. And then on the morning that her and I were meeting, that Pink Floyd song was playing in the car, so very synchronistic. And so we talked for quite some time. I spent 5-6 hours with her, and there's also a Wilhelm Reich museum up there.
Oh, yes, in Rangeley. I've visited a number of times over the years.
Yeah. Gorgeous estate. And since I was in the area, I had to go over there too.
Good.
And I'll tell you a little bit about that after, because it was kind of strange. But so she was in Rangeley. This is where I was. So she, I spent 5-6 hours with her. I must have had 6 cups of coffee. It's ridiculous. I knew somebody was going to ask that question. They're asking what Pink Floyd song. It's written in the book. I don't have it in front of me, but the name of the song is in the book. Enter something. I forget. I'm so sorry. Anyway, so it's about time for me to go. And I feel like we've bonded during this time. She's, a much older woman. And she is looking at me, and it's the first time because I was taking notes furiously. I had a recorder, but I was also taking notes. And I feel like this is the first time I'm really like staring into her eyes for a long period of time. And her eyes are welled up with tears. And she's like, Nomar, you got to tell me, why me? And of course, I have no answer, and I told her that, I'm always very honest with people. And I said, I don't have that answer. I don't know. What I do know is that somebody else who doesn't feel like they can come forward might read your story and relate to it in some way and feel better knowing that they're not alone.
Right.
And that's, I think, the best thing that I can offer you. And it wasn't what she wanted to hear, but she accepted that. I think that, helped her feel a little better, and we left on great terms. I could email her tomorrow and she'd respond, it's not like we correspond constantly or anything, but she's just a lovely woman with a lifetime of really strange encounters. And it was that moment, that was the BC and the AD. And after that day, I'm like, this severely affects people. These aren't just cool, fun, spooky stories. This affects people, and this can affect people negatively, and they carry that around.
Thank you for sharing that. I think I'm going to alter the format of the show for the next few minutes, because over the years that I've been involved in these studies, I've been pretty much a hyper specialist. I get interested in many tangential areas, but I keep coming back to an aspect of UFO research. So the accounts that have come to me over the decades are overwhelmingly UFO related. And I had something happen to me a little over 5 years ago that was one of these experiences. And it happened in the most innocuous kind of location. But I'm going to share this story with you. I think I've shared it once in public before. only to find out if you have ever had an account anything like the one I'm going to share with you now. I had just given a talk at a library in Pennsylvania on James Forrestal, first Secretary of Defense, who I maintain against the historical narrative that he committed suicide, that his life was taken from him. Anyway, it was a talk that I had polished for quite some time and was about to do a DVD of. And it was a wonderful group. I think it's still ongoing, called Mainline MUFON. It's an independent chapter of the organization in Pennsylvania, outside of Philadelphia. And for many years it was run, I think it may still be long distance, by my dear friend and colleague Jennifer Stein, who now is located in Arizona. And the way that it worked was speakers from out of town would come in. We would stay over at Jen's house. We'd give our talk and either head back home that night or stay over another night and head back home the next day. And after the talk, the tradition was we would all go out to a big Greek diner not far away. And, you know, whoever wanted to have dinner with the speaker and the organizers would do just that. I was one of the last to leave the library. And when I got to the diner, almost everybody was seated. There were certainly over 20 people. It was a nice turnout. And it was one long table at a far end of a wall. You've eaten at the same diner, I'm sure. And there were people who I knew, I had relationships with, people I would have really liked to chat with. And I arrived late. There was one seat open at the far end of the table, maybe one or two in, directly opposite an older gentleman who was a guy in the audience. And my first thought was, I was hoping I'd get to eat with those people, or, you know, somebody I knew. And immediately you simply, you know, smile and nod, sit down, get a menu, and make a little bit of small talk. That you have a very real sense of my take on this guy, as our listeners and viewers, is important to me. I'd say he was in his late 70s, but he looked older. He looked like he had been a working man his whole life. Face certainly showed a lot of character, ruddy complexion, dressed extremely casually. A flannel shirt, chinos, some kind of ball cap, a windbreaker. No, you know, sense of fashion being displayed. And we looked at each other, nodded, and he said, I liked your talk. Oh, thank you. And one of the reasons this was a really important exchange to me was, yet once more in life, you get to see your own shortcomings and your own judgmentalness in a simple human situation.
Sure.
I was looking for somebody more interesting, quote unquote, to be seated opposite, or somebody that I knew, that, you know, a little camaraderie here. And I made my order, and he started to tell me some things about himself. It's like, whatever. I'm the guest for the night. I certainly will be cordial and respectful to everybody, but I'm a little disappointed the way this evening worked out, you know, socially. And he said he's a retired police officer, had served his whole time in Philadelphia, and told me about an early incident in his life as a beat cop, the only time he ever had to discharge his handgun. And when he described the situation, it was righteous. He had every right to do it. He certainly felt his life was in danger with the shotgun being aimed directly at him over a banister.
Wow.
And he injured this man, didn't kill him, but the injury really caused this guy's life to change. And when he learned the backstory, he realized there was a guy under tremendous pressure who's the woman in his life had just done a really wrong thing. And, you know, it was like, gosh, you know, poor soul. And he said, but I'd like to tell you something. And at this point, there's no other game in town, I'm right there. And he starts to talk. And at a certain point, I couldn't tell you the exact moment, but I realized, listen. He said, again, pretty early in my career as a cop, a few years in, and I never was anything but a beat cop, I heard sirens and saw fire trucks and followed them to a scene nearby, and a house was on fire. And there was a woman absolutely hysterical and a crowd gathering, saying that her 2 children were inside. And this house was on fire. I mean, it was really burning. The firemen had pulled up, but I impulsively just, ran into the house looking for these kids. I said something more for my benefit than for his, like, gee, that was really courageous of you or something. He said, stop. It's not what I'm talking about. I had been chastised. He was telling me something important, and I was not listening. Now I'm listening. He said, I run in, and things are burning up around me. I make my way to the bedroom. I find a boy unconscious and a little girl, and I take them, one and then the other, out to waiting firemen. The little girl either expired on the way to the hospital or was not alive when I pulled her out. The little boy was still breathing, and I remember his pajamas. He was wearing dark blue pajamas with a bit of piping around the sleeves and the neck that was maroon. Now I'm just there, And as far as I'm concerned, there's just the 2 of us in the world, and I don't know where this is going. And he said, I learned later that the little boy also died. He's declared dead at the hospital. I go, oh my gosh, it's terrible. He says, that's not what I wanted to tell you. He said, 6-7 years later, I'm on my beat. I'm slightly different part of Philadelphia, but I'm working the job. And there's a diner that I sometimes go in. They know me, and I have my lunch there and head out. And I go in that afternoon. Waitresses know me, seats me at a little table. It's pretty packed, and I look around, and I see, like, half the diner away, there's a family, a mom and dad and 2 young kids. And I look at this boy. It's the same kid. He's identical. I immediately am extremely uncomfortable. And at this point, I'm mesmerized. Whatever this is going to, I'm 100% on the way. And he became so uncomfortable that he decided not to stay for lunch. And he got up and, called the waitress over, and he sees this little boy who is keeping an eye on him the whole time. And as he goes to, leave a tip or something and starts to walk, the kid says something, you can't hear what's, at the other side of the room. But he leaves the seat and he starts walking toward that point where he's going to intersect the cop as he's leaving the diner. And he said he did just that. He stood right in front of me, absolutely didn't break eye contact. 2 things. He's wearing a t-shirt. It's dark blue.
I don't know if we lost audio, Peter.
Yep, Peter, we've lost you.
Yeah, where did we lose me? Where,
it sounded like you were going to say that he has the same pipe shirt and sleeves.
yes, he's wearing the same color blue shirt with the same maroon piping. And he looks at the cop and he says, quote unquote, my memory, you recognized me, didn't you? At that moment, inside myself, I just kind of switch gears, go into my most objective self and say, make a character judgment right now. Is there any reason, is there any sense that this man has just wanted to tell you some story to get you to jump because, he's some UFO guy? Or no, he was completely reaffected by what he was saying to me. Body language, hand movements. I realized in that moment that he had just shared something with me that was simply true for him, something that had happened to him that hit me full in the face. I got it. And there wasn't anywhere to go with it. And that's from somebody who, again, has an open mind, has heard their share of hundreds of accounts of non-standard human experience. But that one, class by itself.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard an account even remotely like that?
Boy, like it in story, no, but like it in feeling, yeah. And I think a handful of times, one of them is a mutual friend of ours, Mike Stevens,
Mm,
and he's got a lifetime of encounters to the point
yes.
where I had to write a book about him. And you had us on, a couple years ago to discuss all of that, and people can check
And
that out.
actually, and a great book it is.
Grant, that's it right there. But since Mike's experiences are so vast, it needed a book to cover them all. But there are some moments that are very innocuous and that just sneak up on you and get into your heart and get into your mind, where I am transported into the moment with him. And I'm Mike, and I'm experiencing what he's telling me. And we shared tears together through some of these moments where he was like that gentleman, and you could tell he was re-feeling those feelings. And,
Yes.
and it's some very intense stuff. And when those feelings happen, it's like you say, that's where you're like, just let the recorder do its thing, be in the moment and listen. And that's, again, it's happened a handful full of times. And one time was with that woman I told you about earlier, where I just kind of stopped and was looking at her finally.
I'm remembering, I never asked him his name.
Oh, wow. Yep.
It never even occurred to me. And when I got myself back together, I thanked him for sharing it with me. I did ask Jennifer if she remembered him or if he was a regular. He was somebody I would have liked to have recontacted.
Yeah.
Maybe just to hear it again.
Yeah.
And that's not a normal reaction for me.
No.
A great Shakespeare quote that the world is not only stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we can imagine, which for me takes a fair amount of weight off of us. We grow up surrounded by mysteries, whether it's, the Judeo-Christian religious tradition and all it brings with us in terms of what we are supposed to believe if we want to not burn in eternal damnation, or,
Right.
the whatever the equivalent is in non-theological reality. But I think sometimes, certainly after a certain point in my involvement in investigations, will I have the answers to the questions that I initially asked myself and the ones that I've been asking myself since, and hit that point of not only do I don't think that's going to be the case, but I'm completely okay with it. And what underscores that is how boring life would be without mysteries. Can you imagine? Regular everyday ones, as well as the more exotic ones.
Yeah.
Living out in the countryside. I mean, I'm a New Yorker, and I'm always in Manhattan, somewhere in my head at any point during the day. But I live out in the countryside, and one of the wonderful little perks, especially this time of year, is not just the great variety of birds and wildlife that hang out around my house, but hummingbirds. These
Mm.
phenomenal little creatures that, their wings go a zillion times a minute. And I learned recently that while they travel 3,000 miles, these tiny little creatures, every autumn to go from where we are down to Mexico, then come on back, and this has been scientifically established, they are able to remember every single feeding station along the way. And I
That's wild.
remember late this spring thinking, gee, the hummingbirds will be back pretty soon. I better get out the feeder. And son of a bitch, there's a hummingbird hanging in front of the chain with the empty space where
Yeah,
that
yeah, yeah.
jar is supposed to be.
That's awesome.
An everyday little regular nature miracle. But again, the mysteries that we're surrounded by can either take us down or weigh us down or inspire us
Mhm.
or just keep life interesting in general.
Yeah,
Um,
I would rather get lost in the whimsy as opposed to the stuff weighing me down, and I've let too many things weigh me down through I'm even doing some of that now,
yeah.
but if I can let go of that stuff as much as possible, it's a better place to be.
Yeah, no question about it. Some of your other projects, um,
Mm,
you've written again fiction as well as nonfiction. There's
mhm,
one that I was really curious about. Are these
mhm.
love stories from the other side, so to say?
Uh, I can see why you thought that with the title "Otherworldly and More." First of all, the reason I came up with that title is I like the juxtaposition of the long word with the short word.
Yeah.
Uh, took yeah, so I took the non-American way of spelling amor. I think it's the
Hmm.
Spanish way of spelling it.
Hmm.
So I like that juxtaposition, but, it's a love story with just those 2 people that are on the front cover.
Okay.
That's a documentary I made in 2019, I believe, and it's about a couple from Southern Maine who had been experiencing separately as children lots of paranormal experiences, lots of
Ah,
crazy haunting stuff, traumatic, and then they found each other, fell in love, and then they started experiencing not only hauntings, and they were interpreting a lot of this stuff as hauntings, but then they realized that what's happening might be more extraterrestrial. So, being that they had all these experiences as children, then in their adult life, they actually became paranormal investigators for a while. And so they pulled out their cameras and their audio recorders and started documenting the strange otherworldly extraterrestrial things that were happening in and
ah,
around their home. Yeah.
okay.
So I was interviewing them to be a part of the book, but then they had all this visual evidence, and I'm like, let's turn this into a documentary. And they were hesitant at first, but they came around to it, after talking to me more and knowing I
Sure.
wasn't there to exploit. It's just to share stories. But yeah, that's the couple, Shauna, and she's a wonderful person. Josh, it's been a few years, but something went down with Josh that's just too bad. But they were truly in love once, and during the time that I was making it, I was going through a hard time, and watching them interact with each other, just sharing a knowing glance when they said something, or a hand touches an arm while the other person is saying something, it really spoke to me that finding someone, doesn't matter who, but finding someone to share with
Yes.
is very healing,
Yeah.
and they were in the process of healing each other. It kind of went to hell after a while, which is too bad, but they healed each other for a moment, and I was able to snapshot that. And I think it's important, to capture those stories when you can,
Yeah.
you know.
Well said. Um, the title of this intrigued me.
Oh, yeah.
We know that we're dealing with 3 stories, and it's a wonderfully compelling graphic. Can you tell us a little bit about this trilogy, Noma?
Sure. This is actually just 3 books in one.
Ah,
I was in the process of working on a new book. Um, but being that this is what I do full time, I still kind of needed something out there to
yep,
generate a bit of income.
you bet.
So I took 3 of my books, put them into one volume that people could save money on instead of buying 3 separate. They could save money by buying this one volume that had all 3 books that were just extraterrestrial related. There's hundreds of stories in them, which is great. But yeah, it's 3 previously published works, and I thought a fun title was A Strange Trilogy, and I put that out a few years ago now. It was like before the horror fiction book came out. We only come out at night. Or it was after that. I forget the timing of it, but it was in between books.
And let's go to that book right now. Uh,
Sure.
a wonderful classic title. Is this a classic take on the vampire theme or something other? And is it particularly Maine centric, so to say?
I think it can be Maine centric in that I use my region to set scenes, you know?
Yeah.
So there's a specific forest that I might mention that's just happy in Maine. See your cat there. So it is Maine centric in that sense, but I wouldn't say like you read it and you wouldn't be like, oh, that's a Mainer book. It's hopefully you were scared by it, because it's called flash fiction. So they're short stories, but it's really flash fiction, and that's like under 1,000 words, and a story starts right in a scene. So there's no explanation on how and then the thing happens, and then you kind of get out, and it's supposed to be, whoa, what's happening right now? Okay, now through some exposition and through just storytelling, sharing some plot points, you kind of get to know what happened before and what's going to happen after. And it's supposed to be shocking and spooky, and there's some gruesome stuff that happens in there, and it's this culmination of all of these horror stories that have been trapped in my head since childhood, and I finally was able to like get them out of my head and hopefully scare some other people with them. And each story has typically a crazy creature, but there's also some fun things where like I was a teenage werewolf hunter type of story, and so it's fun stuff like that. But there's particularly gruesome ones where a person was abused in childhood, and their father took their own life because they couldn't get over what they did, and then as an adult this demon found their father in hell and exploits the father to get the child's information so the demon can go mess with the child now. So it's a lot of what I think is fun, like I wouldn't say gruesome, but like just scary and disturbing can be really fun. And then there is lighthearted things in there too, but still scary. There's a serial killer who's been on the job for 27 years. I'm talking about him like he's a grizzled cop, but the serial killer has been doing it for like 27 years. And he feels like he's on his last kill, and he always dumps the bodies in the same body of water. And while he's out there in the middle of the night in this wooded area in the water dumping this thing, he sees a Bigfoot, and the Bigfoot ends up attacking him. And so now it's a story about a serial killer who happened upon a Bigfoot, kind of interesting stuff. Oh, we might have lost your audio again. Did kitty mute you?
Yeah, possibly. I don't think my associate producer had anything to do with it. What other fiction writers are you drawn to, or are you a fan of, whether or not it's in the Stephen King oeuvre or another area? Because again, you're writing fiction and nonfiction, and we draw our inspirations and our entertainment wherever we do.
Yeah, I read a lot of different authors, but some mainstay, obviously, Stephen King. I haven't read all of his work, obviously, but I've read a lot of the stuff, and I've probably, I don't mind admitting, I probably have read a lot more of his mainstream stuff. But there's some Richard Bachman stuff when he was writing under that pseudonym that's really, really good, and people should know about it. Like The Long Walk is an amazing story, and people should check it out. Regulators is an amazing story. But also like Grady Hendrix, some new stuff. My Best Friend's Exorcism. He's not an he's almost releasing like one book a year at this point. Grady Hendrix, but it's really great stuff, and it's digestible horror, if you will. But I like that in my reading. I like reading digestible things that are page turners.
Mm-hmm.
When you know what I mean. I might like the concept, but if it's not turning pages for me, I'm over it, and I'll put a book down. I don't mind stopping a book, and I've done many of them, and then I end up donating them or something. But also my latest obsession, Peter, and I'm admitting this, is I was at my local Goodwill, and I found a treasure trove of Murder, She Wrote books.
Oh, for goodness sakes.
Yeah, based on the TV show, which I absolutely adore. I love Jessica Fletcher.
Yeah.
And so there was like 15 of them. There's a whole bunch of them. And I couldn't get them all because they were like $2, $3, $4 a piece. You know what I mean? So I wasn't going to get them all. But that Jessica Fletcher, in the TV show, she's from Maine. And it's a fictional town called Cabot Cove, Maine. And but she also does solve mysteries in other areas like New York or England or whatever. But I was able to find 5 of these novels that all took place in Maine. So I grabbed all 5 of those, and I am just speed reading through them. They're so good. I'm sure it's just pulp, but I love it.
A fan of a good murder mystery, absolutely. And have been going through the works of the British writer P.D. James over the past few years on a tear. A great novelist, but also a great writer of detective fiction that, for me, is just some of the best escapist literature. And especially if you know England to any degree or like that kind of background, this woman knows about character development, tells stories, and can be as cold-blooded as the best of them. I think sometimes these, like Whistle a Happy Tune, if there is an issue in your life that is causing you anxiety, to find a way to have fun at its expense or fun with it as subject matter. Again, a classic horror movie as opposed to horror in your own life.
Yeah.
Do you find sometimes that, especially, it could be an account that you've gotten in 5 minutes or 5 hours, or somebody that you've worked with or connected with and heard different aspects of their lives for months or longer, that you sometimes think in terms of stress management for them in an informal way and for yourself, because we can get pretty stressed out documenting these kinds of materials depending on, well, a number of factors, but one of them is how deeply these stories move or touch us.
Yeah. Yeah. There's obviously been more of a focus on self-care for me. And the most I can do, I feel like, within my scope and in an appropriate scope for somebody else, is to show them kindness and to be non-judgmental. I'm not an expert.
Your mic. Audio off.
This is crazy. We have had this all night, haven't we?
Yeah.
And
Check.
there we go. He's back.
Okay. There we go.
I think that
There's
might have
nothing
been.
the thing is there's nothing I can do about it. It's gone. I'm over here. I'm all thumbs. You guys are killing me here.
I'm
Okay.
so sorry.
It is what it is.
Yeah, I think that one was my
we got
internet
a third
connection.
guest that we can't see. That's kind of playing around
Yeah,
with.
Mike Stevens, are you trying to get in on this thing? Get out of
Yeah, I
here.
think so.
What was I saying? I'm so sorry.
Again, in terms of stress management, so to say, the stuff that we go through, helping people adjust to something that maybe be going through.
So I don't want to overreach or overstep in an inappropriate way. So again, kindness, non-judgmental is the way I practice caring for these people that are sharing these stories with me. But sometimes they do ask for something more, and I simply recommend somebody else who may be an expert.
Good.
Yeah.
That makes the best sense, I think.
Yeah. I don't want to get into anything too heavy with someone,
Can you take a moment and perhaps from either UFOs Over Maine, or any of your other books, share one more story with us, an account that somebody gave you that may be perhaps more memorable than most?
Okay, let me think about this okay. It's on the shorter side, but it packs a punch. And it's the actual, it's not the emotional part of it. It's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So this woman is at home, and it's early evening. It's like 7 p.m., but it's already dark, or dusk. And her boyfriend is somewhere in the house, and she's on the phone with a friend, and she's got her front door open, but the screen door closed. And they have a dog, and the dog is with her in the kitchen while she's talking on the phone. The dog notices something outside and creeps to the door and sits down and is staring intently outside. She kind of notices this, but pays it no mind, continues to talk on the phone. The dog then begins barking at some side. She thinks some sort of critter has walked by, a raccoon, something, skunk. So she's more so trying to get the dog to be quiet because she's on the phone, as opposed to what is it looking at. The dog has become out of its mind at this point. It's barking in a cadence that's very severe, it's getting hoarse at the end of its bark. You know what I mean? And it's very intense. And she's like, what is going on? And this is the point where she's on the phone with a friend. She's like, I gotta go. Let me call you back. Puts the phone down. And now she's down at the dog, trying to talk to the dog. The dog's ignoring her and looking at something outside and barking. And so she finally looks outside, and she sees what she described as a really tall gray, but it's crouched down, and it's crouched down near a tree, and it's facing away from her. She can see its back, and that, its knees are up because it's crouched down, but its head is turned and staring right at the dog. And that's what the dog is barking at. So she is very frightened at this moment, and she puts her hand inadvertently on the screen door handle. And that was the dog's cue that mom's letting me out to go get this friggin' thing. She didn't mean to do that. She was just kind of steadying herself. The dog bursts out of the screen door and starts running after this thing. It stands up, and he says it's about 7 feet tall, and it starts running away from the dog. As it's running, it starts to disappear or cloak itself from the feet up. So at one point, she's just seeing a torso, and it's looking back every once in a while, and then it's finally gone. This all happens within a matter of seconds, but the dog then stops running and is now standing on all fours and barking towards the direction that this thing ran. So she finally gets the dog inside somehow. I think she just had to go out there and get it. She's yelling to her boyfriend the whole time, like, get down here, get down. He finally gets down there and she tells him what happened. And he totally believes her. Like, she's got no reason to lie. He trusts her. And so they'll go outside to see if there's evidence of this thing being there, and they don't find any. But I just felt the intensity in that moment as she told me that. And I'm trying to convey that intensity as I'm telling the story here. And I was just gobsmacked by that account. Again, it all happened in a matter of minutes. I talked to her from maybe 10. She was kind of like, I'm done with it now. It's yours now, type of thing. And that was it. And she seems put together. She thinks about it, but she's not obsessed over it. She's not upset by it. She's not emotional of it. She was scared in the moment, but she's accepts that aliens are real. And that was a thing. There was one in the backyard one time. And so it was the easiest interview and really intense. And honestly, it was kind of nice to get out of the feels for a change and just into the crux of what happened,
As things stand right now, do you have a next live event where you're going to be where people can actually meet you?
Yeah. This Sunday, I'm going to be in Searsport, Maine, at a location called H&H Mercantile. It's a store that sells Maine goods from Maine artisans, and it's a little bit of a book fair. And there's going to be 6 authors there. I'm one of them, and we're all going to be selling our wares and talking to people and signing books, hopefully, and selling them. And I'll share a story with you, or you can. What inevitably always happens is people come and tell me their stories, and so it's always fun to look forward to. Yeah. So that's Sunday.
Where this coming Sunday, and again, can you give that location again for anybody in Maine who might be able to attend?
Absolutely. H&H Mercantile. It's 383 East Main Street in Searsport, Maine. And it's 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. So a real short event. We're kind of in and out, but it's a little book fair with 6 main authors, and we're all different genres. So it'll be a fun mix.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
You have, by the way, a terrific online store, wonderfully organized and totally professional. It's Slevik, S-L-E. Is that, by the way, have I been mispronouncing your name throughout?
No, I think you're saying it just fine. It's Slevik, and it's Slevik Store, SLEVIK store.company.site.
There
and
we
all
go.
my books are there. All my books are there, but you can also, because I know shipping is a big deal for people. It's a big deal for me when I'm shopping, and I'm not Amazon, so I can't offer free shipping, but the book is available on Amazon. If that's where it's easiest for you, then go get it there. But I do have my own store.
And needless to say, if you don't order from the store and you're not able to get it in person, always a good idea to see if your local bookstore will order it for you, because we need every local bookstore that we can get and hold on to.
Absolutely.
Nomar, it's been a pleasure having you back on the show, and our time really has ripped past. Any closing thoughts on what you do and whether there is a new book right now being worked away on quietly somewhere?
First of all, I'm always working on something. My girlfriend and I just released a new podcast episode. I do a podcast. It's monthly because it's completely way overproduced and it takes me forever to do it. So it comes out. It's called I Want to Believe. And you can search for that wherever you get your podcast, to search I Want to Believe, Nomar Slevik, and you'll find it. And our latest episode is on Pukwudgies. So it's modern Pukwudgie stories. And so we're very excited that episode is out. Also, I am currently in the process of working on a new book, and it's about humanoid encounters, whatever that means. Typically something that's bipedal, that's humanoid in nature.
Yeah.
Those really fascinate me and frighten me, and I want to find as many of those locally as I can and tell those stories. But as far as parting words, I can only go back to when it comes to writing and then when it comes to people. For people, kindness, non-judgmental. And when it comes to writing, because I consider myself a writer first and foremost, is to just get it out. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect grammar or any of that stuff. Just get it out. Let it even be stream of consciousness. It doesn't have to have paragraphs or even periods. Just get it out. You can organize it later. You can hire somebody online for literally $5 to edit it for you. But just get it out, because I'm a big dummy. And if I can write books, you can certainly write something. So don't be afraid. Just do it.
A beautiful thought. And yes, I think it was Thomas Paine who, I forget the first part of the quote, but kindness is my religion. Given the state of the world, a little extra kindness, always welcome.
Absolutely.
Nomar Slevik, a true pleasure having you back on as a guest. We will do it again. This is Peter Robbins. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth. Stay well, stand up for what you believe in, and see you next week.
Thanks, Peter.
My pleasure.